The convent halls grow quiet at night. After evening prayers, after the last hymn drifts into silence, a stillness settles over these old stone walls that feels almost eternal. I often lie awake during those hours, listening to the distant toll of the chapel bell or the faint rustle of robes passing through the corridor. That is when memories come alive the strongest. They whisper like ghosts I cannot silence, no matter how many decades have passed. I have lived as a nun for most of my adult life, dedicating myself to God, to service, to the children who come here searching for comfort and guidance. On the surface, I am serene, a woman of faith, but within me lies a story I rarely dare to share. It is a story carved into my bones, carried in silence for so many years that sometimes I wonder how I even survived. People often imagine nuns as women who were born pious, who lived quiet and untroubled lives before choosing this path. My truth is very different. I did not choose the convent simply out of devotion. I came here fleeing from shadows so dark that I feared they would consume me if I did not find sanctuary. When I was a child, I thought family was the safest place in the world. I believed parents and grandparents existed to protect you, to guide you, to wrap you in a shelter against the cruelties of the outside world. But what happens when the person meant to protect you is the very one who destroys that safety? What happens when the hands that should comfort you are the ones that break you? I was only a girl when I first discovered that home could become a prison. My grandfather lived with us in a modest house just outside a small American town. To everyone else, he was a respected man. He told stories at church gatherings, carried himself with dignity, and neighbors trusted him. To my parents, he was a figure of wisdom, the elder whose presence gave our home its backbone. To me, he was supposed to be the gentle hand of protection. But the truth behind closed doors was very different. I remember the first time the shift happened. I must have been around 12. My parents had gone into town, leaving me behind with him. It was nothing unusual. He often watched over me when they were busy. That afternoon, the house seemed too quiet, the air heavy. He called me into the kitchen with a smile that didn't feel like the smiles I remembered. There was something different in his eyes, something that made my stomach twist before anything even happened. That day marked the beginning of years that would change me forever. His words were gentle, but his actions were not. And when I tried to resist, when fear made me cry, he leaned close and whispered that nobody would ever believe me. He told me my father would hate me if I spoke, that my mother would blame me, that I would be cast out if I dared to break the silence. So I kept quiet. Night after night, day after day, I carried that silence like a weight strapped to my chest. I tried to go about life as though nothing had happened, smiling in church, reciting lessons at school, playing the part of a normal child. But within me, something was dying. I changed. I grew quieter, my laughter disappeared, and I began to shrink into myself. Teachers noticed, asking why my grades were slipping. Friends noticed, wondering why I no longer wanted to play. But I had no words to explain. How could a child confess that her own grandfather had stolen her safety? How could she say aloud what she herself did not fully understand? As the months passed, the silence became its own prison. And within that prison, I felt my body and soul withering. The more he took from me, the less of me remained. I do not share this lightly. Speaking these truths feels like reopening wounds that have barely healed even after a lifetime. Yet I know that there is strength in confession, Not the kind spoken in the wooden booth before a priest, but the kind whispered from one wounded soul to another, to say, "This happened, and I survived." For years, I never said his name aloud. For years, I pretended the shadows were only nightmares. But the truth is, those shadows were real, and they belonged to a man the world thought honorable. My grandfather. I remember the night when my silence almost killed me. The violence had grown worse, his cruelty more reckless. I was still just a child, my body too small, too fragile for the torment it endured. That night I collapsed in the bathroom, bleeding, my cries so faint I wondered if I would simply fade away right there. It was only by chance, or by God's mercy, that my father returned earlier than expected. He found me barely conscious, my body broken, my spirit shattered. I remember whispering one word before darkness took me: help. That moment was the beginning of the unraveling. Secrets cannot stay hidden forever. Pain has a way of breaking through walls, no matter how high you build them. I tell this not to linger in the darkness, but to prepare you for the journey I will share. This is the story of how betrayal and silence nearly destroyed me. But it is also the story of how truth, faith, and resilience carried me from that darkness into the life I live today. Before the darkness entered my life, there was a time of light, or at least what I believed was light. Childhood has a way of painting even the smallest joys in bright colors, and I clung to those memories for years afterward, like fragile lanterns flickering against the shadows that came. To understand my fall, you must first know the innocence I carried, the girl I was before everything changed. Our home was simple, a small wooden house on the edge of town. It had creaky floors, thin walls, and a backyard where wildflowers grew, in patches when spring came. My father worked long hours, gone for days at a time driving delivery trucks across the state. My mother did what she could to make ends meet, sewing clothes for neighbors and baking bread to sell at the market. Life was not easy, but it was steady. And in those steady rhythms, I found a kind of comfort. I remember mornings when my mother hummed hymns as she kneaded dough, her hands dusted in flour. I would sit at the table watching her, the warm scent of yeast filling the air. At school, I was shy but eager, raising my hand often, always hungry to learn. My teachers told my parents I was bright, maybe destined for something beyond the small town that seemed to trap so many in cycles of repetition. I smiled at those words, though I did not yet understand how fragile that promise really was. And then there was him, my grandfather. To everyone else, he was the proud elder, a man who carried himself with quiet strength. Neighbors greeted him with respect. Children waved at him on Sundays as he left church. In my young eyes, he seemed larger than life. He told me stories about his youth, about fishing in wide rivers and working with his hands when he was younger and stronger. He carried peppermint candies in his pocket, pressing one into my palm as though it were a gift too precious to waste. For a while, I adored him. He was the one who walked me to school when my parents were busy, who taught me how to plant seeds in the soil, who tucked me in at night with a gentle pat on the head. He made me feel seen in a house that was often noisy and distracted. Looking back, I can see how carefully he built that trust, how he wrapped his darkness in a disguise of tenderness. But as a child, I only saw the grandfather who smiled at me in church pews and praised me when I recited verses from the Psalms. The turning came slowly, almost invisibly. At first it was the way his eyes lingered too long, how his hand brushed against me a moment too late when adjusting my coat. I told myself I imagined it, that I was foolish to feel the unease creeping up my spine. Children are often taught to doubt their instincts, to believe that adults are always right. I was no different. There was one afternoon that still plays in my mind like a cracked film reel. My parents had gone to town, and I was alone with him in the kitchen. The sun poured through the window, catching the dust in golden beams. He leaned down and told me I was becoming a young lady, his voice lower than usual, his hand resting too firmly on my shoulder. My skin prickled, and I forced a laugh to cover the fear rising in my chest. That laugh, I think, was the last sound of innocence I ever truly made. From then on, I began to notice every little shift, how he found excuses to keep me near, how his smile changed, almost imperceptibly, into something predatory, how the warmth of his presence began to suffocate rather than comfort. But I stayed silent. I wanted to believe in the version of him everyone else saw. I wanted to cling to the image of family as safe, unbroken, whole. School became my only refuge. The chalkboard, the clatter of pencils, the chatter of classmates. Those ordinary sounds felt like lifelines pulling me away from the unease at home. I worked harder on my lessons, hungry for the praise of teachers, desperate to prove I was still the bright girl they thought I was. But no matter how hard I tried, dread followed me. It waited for me at the end of each school day, standing tall, on the porch, smiling with peppermint candies in his pocket. It is strange how even when danger grows near, the child within still clings to hope. I prayed each night that perhaps I was wrong, that maybe tomorrow would be different, that maybe the strange glances and too close touches would vanish as quickly as they had appeared. I did not yet understand that predators thrive on hope, twisting it, feeding off it, until nothing remains but silence. That silence became my prison, and as weeks turned into months, my innocence thinned, like paper worn by too many tears. I was still a child, still clinging to faith, still smiling at school. But deep within, I knew something was coming. Something I would not be able to escape. The day it began in full came on an ordinary afternoon. My mother was gone delivering clothes, my father away on another route. My grandfather closed the door behind him and turned to me with eyes that stripped away every illusion. The fear that had been whispering for months screamed loud inside me, telling me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The afternoon when everything changed still lives inside me as vividly as though it happened yesterday. The air was heavy with summer heat, the kind that made curtains stick to the windows and silence linger too long in every corner of the house. My mother had gone to deliver clothes to a client, my father was on the road, and the neighbors were far enough away that no one could hear, even if I screamed. I was 12 years old, a child standing on the edge of a nightmare I could not yet name. He called me into the kitchen, his voice strangely calm, almost coaxing. I obeyed because that is what children are taught to do. Listen to their elders, respect them, never question. I walked in expecting a simple task, maybe peeling new potatoes or wiping the table. Instead, I found him standing too close, his shadow stretching across the floor like something monstrous. "You're growing up," he said, his words slow and deliberate. His hand reached out and brushed my arm. It was such a small gesture, but it carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I froze, unsure if I should pull away. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe he was just being affectionate. Maybe I was imagining the strange tone in his voice. But then his grip tightened. Not gentle, not loving, but claiming. I tried to laugh it off, to wriggle away, to pretend it was nothing. Children do that. They convince themselves it is not as bad as it feels. But when he leaned closer, his breath hot against my ear, every illusion shattered. My heart pounded so loud I thought the walls would echo it. Fear locked my throat. My lips parted, but no sound came out. That day marked the first true violation of my trust. He told me this was our secret, that no one must ever know. If you tell, he whispered, they'll call you a liar. They'll say you wanted it. His words slithered into my mind, wrapping themselves around my innocence like chains. I felt myself shrinking, folding inward, disappearing even while still standing there. Afterward, I remember sitting alone in my room, hugging my knees so tightly they left bruises on my arms. I wanted to tell my mother, but her voice echoed in my mind. Respect your elders, honor your family. I wanted to tell my father, but the thought of his disbelief, or worse, his rage, silenced me. So I swallowed my pain. I told no one. But it did not end there. The next time came days later, then again after that. His patterns were precise, calculated. He knew exactly when my mother would be away, exactly how long my father would be gone. The house that once felt familiar became a cage. Each hallway, another corridor of fear. I dreaded the sound of footsteps behind me. I flinched at the creak of floorboards. Even the sweet smell of peppermint candies, once a comfort, turned into a sickening reminder of what waited for me. I began to change in ways others could see but never understand. My teachers noticed first. "Helen, you've always been such a good student," one asked kindly when my grades slipped. "What's happening to you?" I wanted so badly to answer, to pour it all out. But Robert's, no, my grandfather's, threats rang louder than my courage. "No one will believe you. You'll be the one blamed." So I bowed my head, murmured something about not sleeping, and carried the weight back home. At home, I tried to make myself invisible. I wore baggy clothes, cut my hair shorter, stopped smiling. I hoped that if I hid myself enough, maybe he would lose interest, maybe he would stop. But predators do not stop because you disappear. They thrive on your silence, on the belief that you cannot fight back. And I was too small, too frightened, too bound by the invisible chains of shame to resist. There was one evening I will never forget. After another encounter that left me trembling, he crouched low, his face inches from mine, and said, "If you ever tell your father, I'll say you came to me. I'll tell him you're not the innocent girl he thinks you are." His words burned deeper than his actions. They planted a seed of doubt inside me. Was it my fault? Had I somehow caused this? I carried those questions like poison, letting them seep into every corner of my mind. Silence became both my shield and my prison. At school, I kept my head down. At home, I learned to listen for every sound, to map his footsteps, to calculate the minutes until someone returned. My entire world shrank to survival. But even in the thick of fear, there were moments when I prayed. At night, under my thin blanket, I whispered to God, "Please, make him stop. Please, protect me." I did not yet understand why heaven felt silent, why the abuse continued despite my pleas. But those prayers were my only lifeline, the only voice I dared to use what I did not know then was that silence cannot last forever. Secrets have a way of breaking through, of demanding to be revealed no matter how deep they are buried. And though I did not yet understand it, my silence would eventually give way to a storm that tore my family apart. For now, though, I remained, trapped in fear, a child forced into a darkness no one could see, and deep down I began to sense that my body itself was breaking under the weight of it all. After that first violation, silence became the only shield I thought I had. But it was a shield made of glass, fragile, heavy, and impossible to hold without cutting myself. Every day I carried it, and every day it cut deeper. My grandfather had mastered the art of timing. He knew my mother's errands, the exact hours she lingered with neighbors after delivering laundry. He knew my father's schedule, the days when the long-distance routes would keep him away for a week or more. He used those absences like open doors, slipping into them, turning ordinary afternoons into traps. I began to live with constant vigilance. Each creak of the floorboards made me tense. Each knock at the door made my heart leap. I learned the rhythm of the house too well, the slam of the screen door when my mother left, the hum of her voice fading down the street. Those sounds, once harmless, became signals of danger. In school, I looked like a different child. The teachers who once praised me for my diligence now frowned at my declining grades. I couldn't concentrate on multiplication tables or history, lessons when my mind was filled with dread of the next time I'd be left alone. My eyes grew hollow, my smile disappeared, and whispers followed me through the hallways. One teacher pulled me aside. "Helen, is something wrong at home?" she asked, her face gentle with concern. My lips parted. For a heartbeat, I considered it. I imagined her believing me, protecting me. But then his words came back, sharp as knives. "No one will ever believe you. They'll say you wanted it. They'll say you're the liar." I shook my head quickly, staring at the ground. "I'm just tired," I whispered. The lie tasted bitter, but it felt safer than the truth. At home, I tried to make myself invisible. I traded dresses for oversized sweaters as though fabric could hide me. I cut my hair short, no longer wanting to appear pretty. I stopped humming, stopped laughing, stopped looking at myself in mirrors. Each small act was an attempt to erase the girl he had turned into prey. But predators are not fooled by disguises. He still found me. He still pressed the silence onto me like a brand. His manipulation grew sharper with each day. "If you tell anyone," he hissed once, "I'll tell them you've been tempting me. I'll tell them you're wicked." At 12 years old, I didn't even fully understand the words he used, but I understood shame. I understood that he was twisting the story to trap me in guilt that wasn't mine. My mother, though, noticed something. She would tilt her head when looking at me, worry creasing her brow. "Helen, you don't eat anymore. Are you sick?" she asked once over dinner. My fork trembled in my hand. I forced a bite of bread into my mouth, nodding. "I'm fine, Mama," I said with a weak smile. Inside, I wanted to scream, "No, I'm not fine. I'm dying inside, and you can't see it." But I swallowed the bread, and with it, my truth. The body does not lie, though. Weeks of fear turned into weight loss, dark circles, trembling hands. My body began to falter under the weight of carrying secrets too heavy for a child. And yet, no one around me could connect the dots. Perhaps they didn't want to. Perhaps it was easier to believe their daughter was just going through a difficult phase than to imagine what was truly happening under their roof. It went on like that, day after day, silence binding me tighter. I lived in dread of footsteps. Outside my door, of the key rattling in the lock. I pushed furniture against it sometimes, but it never helped. He would force his way in, smirking, reminding me that I belonged to his silence. One morning, after another night of torment, I looked into the bathroom mirror. My reflection startled me. The girl staring back was not the same Helen who once laughed at fireflies in the backyard. This girl had hollow eyes, lips pressed tight as though holding back a scream. She looked like a ghost. I pressed my palm to the glass and whispered, "It's not your fault." The words came out shaky, uncertain, but they were the first spark of defiance I had dared to feel. Even so, the spark was quickly smothered by fear, because fear was everywhere. In his threats, in the silence of my parents, in the walls of that house. The violence escalated, and with it my body began to betray me. I started bleeding outside of my monthly cycle, sharp pain seizing my stomach until I curled on the floor in agony. I told myself it was just sickness, that it would pass. But deep down, I knew the truth. My body was breaking under the weight of what was being done to it. There was one night when the pain grew so unbearable that I fainted in the bathroom. I woke on the tiles, weak and dizzy, a red stain spreading beneath me. My breaths came shallow, and for a moment I thought perhaps death had come to take me. And I almost welcomed it. At least then, the silence would end. But death did not come. Instead, my father returned earlier than expected from his route. I remember the sound of his boots on the stairs, his voice calling my name. The door burst open, and he found me lying there. His face, usually calm and steady, twisted into terror. He scooped me up in his arms, shouting for my mother. I remember whispering only one word before everything went black: help. That night was the breaking point. Secrets can survive only so long before they force themselves into the light. My silence had carried me into the depths of despair, but my body, my pain, finally spoke louder than my fear. I did not know it yet, but the storm of truth was coming. And with it, the fragile walls of my family were about to shatter. The night my father found me on the bathroom floor marked the beginning of an unraveling I could no longer control. Until then, I had lived in silence, clinging to the belief that if I endured quietly, somehow I could keep the family whole. But secrets have a way of bleeding into the open, and mine came through my body, through the wounds no words could describe. I remember faint fragments of that night. My father's strong arms lifting me, his voice breaking into a cry I had never heard from him before. My mother's gasp, the clatter of something falling from her hands. The rush to the truck, the wheels skidding on gravel as he drove faster than he ever had. And then, darkness swallowing me again. When I woke, the smell of antiseptic filled the air. The ceiling above me was white, the lights blinding. I tried to move, but pain shot through me, sharp and unrelenting. A nurse pressed a cool hand to my forehead. "Don't try to sit up, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're safe here." Safe. The word struck me with bitter irony. I had not felt safe in years. Doctors swirled around me, voices overlapping in medical terms I didn't understand. But one phrase pierced through the haze and lodged in my heart: continued and violent sexual abuse. I heard it as if from far away, but I knew it was the truth I had been hiding, spoken aloud by strangers in a sterile room. I wanted to sink into the mattress, to vanish, to escape their eyes that now saw me differently. My father's face when he heard those words is something I will never forget. He, who had always been my protector, stood rooted in shock, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with a rage that frightened even me. He turned to my mother, his voice shaking. "Who did this to her? Who?" My mother broke into sobs, rocking herself in the corner, unable to answer. They asked me too, again and again. Nurses, detectives, a woman with kind eyes who introduced herself as a social worker. "Helen," she said gently, "can you tell us who hurt you? You're safe now. No one can harm you here." I opened my mouth, but the words refused to come. Fear wrapped around my throat, the memory of his threats suffocating me. "If you tell, they will never believe you. They'll say you wanted it." And so I lied. I whispered that it was strangers, boys I didn't know, men from out of town. I gave them shadows instead of the face that haunted me every night. It was my first true lie, and it sat like poison on my tongue. I told myself it was to protect my family, to keep my father from tearing himself apart. But deep down, I knew it was fear. Fear of losing everything, fear of unleashing his wrath on the man who had ruined me, fear of watching my family collapse into rubble. The days in the hospital blurred together. Nurses changed bandages. Doctors murmured about damage that might never fully heal. At 12 years old, I heard them say words no child should ever hear. "She may never bear children. Her body has suffered too much trauma." I turned my face to the wall, tears sliding silently across the pillow. They weren't just talking about my body. They were naming the ruin of my innocence. My father rarely left my side. His large, calloused hand gripped mine while I slept, as though letting go meant losing me forever. He whispered, "I'll find who did this. I swear it, Helen. I'll make them pay." I would squeeze his hand weakly, unable to tell him that. The enemy was under his own roof. Each time I almost spoke, fear pulled me back. What if he didn't believe me? What if his anger destroyed everything? My grandfather did not visit the hospital. That absence screamed louder than any presence. My father noticed, too. One night he muttered, "Strange he hasn't come." His eyes narrowed with suspicion, though he said nothing more. My heart raced. Could he sense the truth? Could he see the cracks in the lie I had tried to build? The community, of course, whispered. News travels quickly in small towns, and by the time I returned home, eyes followed me everywhere. Some pitied me. Some looked at me as if I were contagious. Others whispered cruel theories about what must have happened. I walked through those stairs like a ghost, my silence heavier than ever. At home, the tension grew unbearable. My father carried guilt like a second skin. "I should have been here," he repeated at night, his voice cracking. "I should have protected you." My mother retreated into herself, fussing over meals, trying to smile, pretending everything was normal while her eyes betrayed a deep, unspoken fear. And my grandfather, he acted as though nothing had happened. He still sat at the dinner table, still told stories in his booming voice, still dropped peppermint candies into his pocket as though he had not shattered my life. His eyes, when they met mine, carried a silent command: say nothing. The walls of our house became unbearable. Each room echoed with secrets. Each corner reminded me of the silence I carried. My nights were plagued by nightmares. I woke sweating, screaming, my father rushing to hold me. I told him they were only dreams, but we both knew they were something more. The breaking point had come, not just in my body, but in my soul. I could not carry the silence forever. Something inside me knew the truth would one day erupt, no matter how hard I tried to bury it. But in those days, I still believed silence was my only way to survive. I was wrong. Silence would soon destroy everything I was trying so desperately to protect. The weeks after my release from the hospital were a blur of uneasy silence and mounting tension. Our home, once noisy with ordinary routines, now felt like a battlefield where no one dared speak aloud what they truly feared. My father's eyes carried storms. My mother's hands trembled even when she folded laundry, and my grandfather sat in his usual chair, calm and unshaken, as though nothing had changed. His presence poisoned the air, and yet no one could name it. I tried to carry on as though life were normal, but the weight of my secret gnawed at me. I watched my father grow thinner with guilt, my mother retreat into a shell of denial, and I wondered if perhaps my silence had already destroyed us. Still, fear bound me. His threats echoed in my ears. If you tell, they won't believe you. If you speak, you'll be the one to blame. But the cracks in my silence were widening. One night at dinner, I pushed food around my plate, unable to eat. My father's gaze settled on me. "Helen," he said quietly, "I need you to be honest with me. Who hurt you?" His voice was gentle, but beneath it lay a fire that could no longer be contained. I froze, my fork clattering against the plate. My mother's breath caught. Across the table, my grandfather's eyes met mine, a silent warning, a reminder of the threats he had carved into my soul. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, I whispered, "I don't know." It was a lie I had told too many times, and the disappointment in my father's eyes cut deeper than any wound. The days that followed grew heavier. My father began watching my grandfather more closely. He noticed his absence the night of my collapse, his evasive answers, the way his presence seemed to fill me with dread. My father was a man of patience, but his patience was wearing thin. Remember one evening vividly. I had woken from another nightmare, my body drenched in sweat, my throat raw from silent screams. My father came into my room, sitting on the edge of my bed. In the dim light, his face looked older, lined with sorrow. "Helen," he said, his voice breaking, "please trust me. I will believe you. Whoever hurt you, I will protect you. Just tell me." For the first time, I believed him. For the first time, I felt the possibility that my silence was not the only way. Tears streamed down my face as I shook my head, words lodged in my throat. My lips trembled, and in a voice so small it almost disappeared, I whispered, "It was him." My father leaned closer. "Who?" I could barely form the word. "Grandpa." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's body stiffened, his breath caught, and for a moment I feared I had broken him completely. His eyes darkened with a rage I had never seen before, a fury so raw it terrified me. He stood abruptly, his fists clenched, and stormed out of the room. From my bed, I heard the shouting downstairs, my father's voice, loud and shaking. "How could you? She's a child!" My mother's sobs rose in response, and then my grandfather's booming denial filled the house. "She's lying! She's making this up!" His words dripped with venom, twisting the truth as he always had. The fight shook the very walls of our home. Plates shattered, furniture scraped across the floor. I buried my face in my pillow, trembling, listening as the man who had ruined me now tore my family apart. My mother pleaded for calm, her voice breaking. My father's rage roared back. My grandfather refused to bend, his denial louder than ever. In the end, the police were called. Neighbors had heard the screaming, the chaos. When the officers arrived, I saw the flashing lights through my bedroom window, red and blue cutting through the night. My father shouted that he wanted my grandfather out, gone, punished. My mother clung to me, sobbing, as officers led him away for questioning. But even then, his eyes found mine. As they dragged him through the doorway, he turned his head and glared at me, a look that said, "You've destroyed us. This is your fault." That look haunted me long after the door closed. The aftermath was unbearable. My father, though relieved the truth was finally out, carried a rage that consumed him. He punched walls, cursed himself for not seeing sooner, swore he would never forgive his own father for what he had done. My mother sank deeper into despair, torn between love for her daughter and the shattering betrayal of her father. The house, once fragile but intact, was now in ruins, and me, I was caught in the middle, drowning in guilt. I had told the truth, but instead of freedom, I felt chains of a different kind. I had broken the silence, but in doing so, I had broken my family. The community turned cruel. Whispers grew louder. People avoided our house, some accusing me of lies, others pitying me in ways that felt like another wound. I walked through town feeling marked, as though everyone could see the scars on my soul. That was the moment I realized. Silence had not protected me, and truth did not free me. Both had cost me more than I could bear. Still, deep inside, I knew one thing. The truth, once spoken, cannot be taken back. The storm had come, and my family would never be the same. The night my grandfather was taken away by the police should have felt like liberation, but instead it felt like stepping into another kind of prison. I thought that once the truth was out, the weight would lift, that I would finally be free of his shadow. But freedom did not come easily. What followed was chaos, shame, and a sense of ruin that spread through my family like wildfire. The days after his arrest were filled with endless questions. Detectives came, notebooks in hand, asking me to repeat details I wanted only to forget. Each time I spoke, I felt as though I was being stripped bare all over again, my pain dissected under harsh fluorescent lights. They said they needed every detail to make sure justice was done, but I was still just a child, trembling under their gaze, wishing I could vanish. My father stood beside me through each interview, his jaw clenched, his hands fisted in anger. His protective presence gave me strength, but his rage frightened me too. I feared what he might do if they released my grandfather, if he dared return. My father muttered often that he would kill him with his bare hands if the system failed. Those words chilled me, because even though I hated what my grandfather had done, the thought of more violence, more destruction, left me feeling sick. My mother, on the other hand, seemed broken beyond repair. She cried constantly, her sobs echoing through the house at night. She mourned not only for me, but for the father she thought she knew. Sometimes I heard her whisper, "How could he? How could he do this to us?" As if she were speaking to ghosts. Her grief turned into withdrawal, and though she tried to comfort me, her eyes always seemed far away. And then there were the neighbors. Small towns are not kind to secrets, and ours had exploded into the open. Some offered pity, their voices hushed, their glances full of sorrow. Others doubted. "Are you sure, Helen?" They asked in whispers, their eyes darting. He was such a respected man. Their doubt cut me deeper than any blade, confirming the fears my grandfather had planted, that people would not believe me, that I would be branded as the liar, the destroyer of reputations. The court process was grueling. I was asked to testify, to sit in a room where lawyers spoke of me as if I were a case file rather than a human being. My grandfather sat across the room, his eyes cold, his mouth twisting into a smirk that only I seemed to notice. It was as if he wanted to remind me that even in chains, he still had power over me. I spoke the truth anyway. My voice shook, tears blurred my vision, but I forced the words out. Each sentence felt like dragging broken glass from my throat. Yes, he hurt me. Yes, it was him. No, I am not lying. By the end, I felt drained, like a hollow shell, but also relieved that I had said it aloud where no one could deny it anymore. When the verdict came, my father cried for the first time in front of me. My grandfather was sentenced, taken away, for what he had done. Justice, they called it. But it did not feel like justice. No sentence could erase the years of torment, the nights of silence, the scars carved into my body and soul. No jail cell could return the innocence he had stolen. At home, life did not settle. If anything, it grew harder. My father carried guilt like a stone chained to his chest. I should have protected you, he said over and over, as if the words could undo the past. He drank more, his hands trembling when he thought I wasn't looking. My mother slipped deeper into despair, sometimes disappearing for hours, leaving me alone with my own thoughts. And me? I was left to navigate a world that now saw me as broken. At school, whispers followed me. Some classmates avoided me, others mocked in cruel tones, calling me names I cannot repeat. I felt marked, stained, as though everyone could see what had been done to me. There were nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if silence might have been easier. If perhaps keeping the secret would have spared my family the ruin, spared me the stares and whispers, but then I would remember the bathroom floor, the blood, the night I nearly died, and I knew silence would have killed me eventually. Speaking had shattered us, but it had also saved me. Still, I longed for escape. The house was filled with grief and anger, the town with judgment, my mind with nightmares. I found myself retreating, more often into prayer, kneeling by my bed, whispering words I wasn't sure anyone heard. Lord, please take this pain. Please make me whole again. Even when heaven seemed silent, the act of speaking those prayers gave me a sliver of peace. Looking back now, I can see that rescue and ruin often come hand in hand. The truth rescued me from silence, from his grip, but it ruined the life I thought I knew. My family was never the same. My childhood was gone. But in those ashes, the first fragile seeds of healing were being planted, though I could not see them yet. At that time, I only knew one thing. The storm had passed, but I was still, standing in its wreckage, unsure if I would ever find solid ground again. After the trial ended and my grandfather was gone, I thought healing would begin immediately, as though the removal of his presence would somehow erase the scars he left behind. But healing is not so simple. It does not arrive with a verdict or a prison door slamming shut. It creeps slowly, painfully, like a tender sprout pushing through hard soil. The weeks after his sentencing were some of the hardest of my life. I returned to a house that no longer felt like a home. My father was consumed with guilt and anger. He paced the halls late at night, whispering curses under his breath, sometimes striking the wall with his fist until his knuckles bled. He told me again and again, "I should have protected you. I failed you." I tried to tell him it was not his fault, but my words never seemed to reach him. He carried his guilt like armor, impenetrable and heavy. My mother withdrew further into herself. She busied her hands with endless chores, scrubbing the same countertops, folding and refolding laundry. Her eyes were often red from crying, though she rarely let me see. She struggled to reconcile the father she once trusted with the monster who had destroyed me. I could see her breaking, and in my childish mind, I blamed myself. If I had stayed silent, would she still be whole? If I had endured longer, would my family have remained intact? Guilt became a constant companion, whispering lies I didn't know how to silence. The town's judgment was another wound. Children whispered in school, pointing when they thought I could not hear. Some parents pulled their children away from me as though I carried a disease. Others pitied me so openly it felt suffocating. I wanted to disappear, to melt into shadows, to escape the eyes that branded me as broken. It was during those years that my health faltered again. Nightmares woke me drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as though I were still trapped in his grasp. I refused food, my body shrinking, my spirit too exhausted to care. Doctors recommended counseling, and though my parents resisted at first, eventually they agreed. That was how I met Mrs. Turner, a therapist whose gentle patience became a lifeline. At first, I barely spoke in her office. I would sit with my arms wrapped around myself, staring at the floor, convinced that words could only bring more pain. But she never rushed me. Week after week, she asked simple questions, her voice steady and kind. "How are you sleeping, Helen? What makes you feel safe?" Slowly, piece by piece, I began to answer. And with each answer, a sliver of weight lifted from my chest. She helped me understand that what happened was not my fault, that the shame I carried was misplaced, belonging not to me, but to the man who had hurt me. Those words were like water to dry ground. I clung to them, though part of me still doubted. It would take years before I truly believed them. School became both a refuge and a torment. I buried myself in books, escaping into stories where good triumphed over evil, where innocence was restored, where villains were always punished. But reality was not so tidy. Cruel whispers lingered, and I walked hallways with my head down, praying for invisibility. Still, books gave me a glimpse of another world, a world where I could one day be more than what had been done to me. It was around this time that I began to find solace in faith. I had always prayed as a child, whispering desperate pleas into the night. But now prayer became something different. It was no longer begging for rescue. It was a conversation, a pouring out of grief to a God who I hoped was listening. Sometimes, in the quiet of the church, I felt a presence, a stillness that gave me a flicker of peace. One afternoon, I wandered into the small Catholic school chapel after classes. The sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting colors across the floor. A nun stood near the altar, arranging candles. She noticed me and offered a gentle smile. "You're welcome here, anytime," she said. Her kindness startled me. She didn't look at me with pity, didn't glance away in discomfort. She looked at me as though I was whole. That was the first time I considered that perhaps my future was not ruined. That maybe, beyond the pain, there could be purpose. The road ahead was still long. I stumbled often, drowning in self-blame, weighed down by scars no one could see. But seeds had been planted. In therapy, in prayer, in the quiet kindness of people who chose not to judge me. Seeds that one day would grow into the life I live now. At that time, though, all I knew was that healing was not a straight line. It was a jagged path, filled with setbacks and faint glimmers of hope. I walked it slowly, painfully, but with each step I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the darkness would not have the final word. The years that followed were a slow unfolding, like a wound trying to close but reopening with every memory. Healing was not quick, and it was never easy, but small changes began to shape my life in ways I could not yet understand. Therapy gave me words for feelings I had buried. Prayer gave me stillness in moments of panic. And with time, I found myself drawn more and more to the quiet sanctuary of the church. At first, stepping into a chapel was only about escape. The halls of my school were loud with whispers, my home heavy with silence, but the church was different. There, I could breathe. The stained glass poured light across the floor, like a promise that even shattered pieces could create something beautiful. I would sit in the back pew after classes, my hands clasped, my lips moving in whispered prayers. Sometimes I cried without words at all, and in that silence I felt less alone. The nuns who ran the Catholic school noticed me. One in particular, Sister Catherine, had a way of looking into my eyes without flinching. She didn't treat me like damaged glass. Instead, she spoke to me with a calm strength that steadied my trembling spirit. One afternoon, she found me in the chapel and sat beside me. "Helen," she said softly, "you've carried more than most adults ever could. But you are not broken. You are here. That means you are stronger than you know." Her words lingered long after she left. Strong. I had never thought of myself as strong. I had thought of myself as ruined, tainted, unworthy. But what if she was right? What if surviving itself was a kind of strength? As I grew older, the idea of leaving my past behind grew stronger, but I had no idea how. My father wanted me to pursue college, to build a future beyond our small town. My mother longed for normalcy, urging me to marry one day, to give her the grandchildren she feared might never come. But in my heart, I felt pulled in a different direction. I did not long for marriage or children. The thought of intimacy terrified me, haunted me with memories I could not erase. What I longed for was peace, and I found glimpses of it in prayer. I began spending more time with the sisters at school, helping with younger children, assisting with their lessons, joining in hymns. The structure of their lives, the rhythm of prayer and work, felt like a balm to my restless spirit. While others my age chased after dances and dates, I lingered in the chapel, lit candles, and listened to the echoes of hymns that felt like healing. It was Sister Catherine who first asked me, "Have you ever thought about a vocation?" I looked at her blankly, unsure of her meaning. She smiled gently. "I mean, have you ever considered becoming a sister yourself?" The question startled me. Me, a nun? The thought seemed impossible at first. Could someone like me, marked by shame and scarred by pain, belong to a life devoted to God? But the more I considered it, the more it made sense. My scars made the world feel unsafe. But within the convent walls, there was order, discipline, and a kind of sanctuary that spoke directly to my wounded soul. When I finally told my parents, the reactions could not have been more different. My father, though sad that I would not follow the path he envisioned, nodded slowly and said, "If this is what brings you peace, then you have my blessing." His voice cracked, but his eyes held pride. My mother wept, insisting she would lose me again, that my life would be too hard. But beneath her tears, I think even she understood that the convent offered something she could not give me, a chance at wholeness. The day I entered the convent is etched into my memory. I wore a simple dress, carrying little more than a suitcase, and the weight of my past. The gates closed behind me with a sound that felt final and freeing all at once. I walked into a life of discipline, early morning prayers, long hours of service, vows that required sacrifice. But for the first time, I felt like I had stepped into a place where my past no longer defined me. Life in the convent was not without challenges. The silence, though healing, also forced me to confront memories I wished to bury. The vows demanded more than I sometimes felt able to give. Yet with every sunrise in the chapel, with every hymn sung in unison, I felt layers of pain begin to loosen their grip. I was no longer the helpless child. I was a woman who had chosen a path, not one forced upon me. Looking back now, I see that choosing the convent was not about running from my past, but about transforming it. The very scars that once shamed me became the foundation of my calling. I understood suffering, and that understanding made me tender toward the suffering of others. I knew what it meant to feel abandoned, and so I devoted myself to making sure no child, no soul under my care would ever feel the same. That choice, the choice to live as a nun, was not a surrender to the darkness of my past. It was my defiance against it. It was my way of saying, you tried to destroy me, but here I stand, alive, devoted, and free. When I look back on the path that led me here, to these quiet convent walls, I see a trail of broken pieces. Each fragment is sharp, each memory heavy, and yet, somehow together, they have shaped the woman I am today. I never imagined I would live as a nun, never thought I would find peace in the rhythm of prayer and silence. And yet, here I am. Not because my life was untouched by darkness, but because I chose to let the darkness refine me instead of destroy me. The convent became more than a refuge. It became a place of transformation. In those first years, I learned discipline, humility, and the quiet strength of service. My hands, once trembling with fear, found purpose in caring for children, teaching them their lessons, bandaging scraped knees, and reminding them of their worth. Every time I looked into a child's eyes, I remembered the girl I once was, desperate for someone to see her pain. And in seeing them, I began to heal myself. There were days, of course, when memories returned uninvited. Nightmares still found me, dragging me back to that house, those threats, that silence. But unlike before, I was no longer alone. I had sisters beside me who prayed with me, mentors who listened without judgment, and a God who, though I once doubted him, had never abandoned me. The scars remained, but they no longer ruled me. Over the years, I came to understand something important. Survival is not just living past the pain. It is choosing every day to stand, to breathe, to love in spite of it. My grandfather tried to take everything from me, my childhood, my trust, my voice. But he did not succeed. I still have my voice. And in telling my story, I reclaim it again and again. Sometimes young women come to me, eyes full of sorrow, burdened with secrets they are afraid to speak. I see myself in them, the way they twist their hands, the way silence weighs on their shoulders. I tell them gently, "You are not alone. What happened to you does not define you." and I watch as their tears turn, little by little, into hope. If my suffering has given me the strength to reach them, then perhaps even my deepest wounds have meaning. I will not pretend the journey was simple. There were years when bitterness tempted me, when I wanted to hate the world for what it allowed. There were days when I questioned God, when I asked why He had let me suffer so. But in the quiet of prayer, I found an answer, not in words, but in presence. He had been there in my weakest moments, carrying me through when I could not walk myself. His silence had not been abandonment. It had been the patience of a father, waiting for me to find my strength. Now, as I walk these halls in my older years, I carry peace within me. Not a peace that forgets the past, but one that accepts it. I cannot erase what was done, but I can choose what I do with it. And I have chosen to turn it into compassion, into service, into love. To anyone who hears my story, who carries secrets of their own, I say this: your pain does not make you unworthy. Your scars do not make you broken. They are the proof that you have endured, that you have lived through storms that would have destroyed others. If I, Helen Cartwright, could survive betrayal within my own home, if I could rise from silence and choose life, then so can you. I do not share this story to shock, nor to dwell in sorrow. I share it to remind you that even in the darkest nights, dawn will come. Even when you feel abandoned, there is hope waiting, quietly, like light through stained glass. Today, when I kneel in the chapel and whisper my prayers, I no longer beg for rescue. Instead, I give thanks. Thanks for the strength I did not know I carried. Thanks for the sisters who walk beside me. Thanks for the God who turned my pain into purpose. My life has not been easy, but it has been redeemed. And so I end this confession with a blessing. To you who are listening, carrying your own burdens, may you know that you are not alone. May you find the courage to speak, the strength to heal, and the grace to choose life in the face of sorrow. Because if my story proves anything, it is this: no darkness, no matter how deep, has the power to extinguish the light completely.